What's up, RSQUAD? My name is Kate, and welcome to week 2 of our series, Bold. I'm really excited about this series, if you can't tell, and during this series, we are taking a deep dive into 3 different individuals who boldly lived for Christ throughout Scripture, throughout their lives. And today, the title of the message is Boldness Isn't Fearlessness, It's Faithfulness. A little bit of a tongue twister there. Boldness isn't fearlessness, it's faithfulness. And I'm excited to dive into this message today, but when I think about being bold, I think about times in my life that I did something a little scary, right? I mean, has there ever been a time in your life that you've had to do something scary? Maybe it was a time in your life where you feel like you had to muster up every ounce of courage to say yes or stepping out in faith and doing that, whatever that thing may be. Whenever I think of boldness, I think about this right here. These pictures and videos keep popping up on my Instagram feed of these people jumping off of these giant diving boards high up in the sky. I don't know about you, but I get anxiety just looking at these pictures and videos. That probably took some boldness. But when I think of boldness personally, I think about this story that my mom always shares with me of when I was young. I was really young, and we were at this pool party with some friends. And I climbed up onto this wall. This wall was several feet in the air, and the pool was right below it. And my plan of the day as a young child was to climb up on this wall and jump off into the pool. So I climb up to this wall, I get up there, and I start looking down. And I see how far away the water is. And now, fear is starting to creep into my mind, and I stood there for what felt like hours trying to decide if I could jump off of the wall into the pool. Eventually, I decided not to, and I quit. And I walked off the wall, and I was a failure in that moment. And then after several minutes, I decided, no, I'm going to do it. I am going to jump off this wall into the pool. I'm going to conquer my fears. So I stormed back up onto this wall. I get up there and I see my dad in the pool, and I am determined that I'm going to do it. And sure enough, I jumped off the wall and I jump into the pool. I come out of the water and the crowd goes wild. There was no crowd, but I like to imagine it like that because then it just makes the moment, a little bit bigger. Either way, I felt so accomplished. I was so proud of myself. I had conquered my fear. I did something scary. I did something that took boldness, and I felt so good for accomplishing it. And I think that's how we feel in our faith sometimes, right? Like we see this opportunity to be bold for Jesus, to live for Jesus, but fear keeps us from it. Bold faith doesn't mean being fearless. It means being faithful when it's hard. And that's the idea that I want to lean into today. That bold faith doesn't mean being fearless. It means being faithful when it's hard. RSQUAD, welcome to my infomercial. We are in a series on boldness. Text 1-800-BOLD. And I want to tell you about an opportunity for you to be bold in your faith coming up. In just a few months, this summer, we have our first ever student missions trip for teenagers, all right? I'm gonna be there. You're gonna wanna come hang out with us in the Dominican Republic. So I wanna encourage you to get signed up for this, apply for this trip. You can do it right here on this QR code. Applications close in March, so talk to your parents about it, pray about it, and let's be bold in our faith. And in the book of Exodus, we see the story of a man named Moses. And Moses did bold things for God, even though it was hard. And in the beginning of the book of Moses, Moses has an encounter with God, and God tells him this. In Exodus 3, verses 7-8, God says, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and led them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. We see in this passage that the Lord has compassion on his people who are struggling, right? The Israelites at the time were in slavery under the power of Pharaoh, under the power of the Egyptians. And God didn't want these people, he didn't want his people, the Israelites, to be in slavery anymore. And so then here's what the Lord said to Moses. This is where it gets kind of funny. God said, "Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt." But Moses protested to God. "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" This is hilarious. God calls a shepherd boy. God calls a guy who chases sheep around a field all day to lead thousands of people out of Egypt. What? And it's hilarious because I don't think we're the only ones that think it's crazy. We can see in Moses' response his resistance. We can see that Moses also thinks that God asking him to do this is a little crazy. We can see that Moses is questioning, am I the guy for this job? The exact words that Moses uses here is, who am I? Who am I to do what you are calling me to do? I'm just the guy that chases sheep around. Anyone chase sheep around? I don't. But I want to ask you today, have you ever questioned God when he has called you to do something bold? I know that has happened to me several times in my life where God has called me to do something and I have questioned if I should. I have doubted God. And there's been times where God has said, "Kate, I want you to share your faith with a friend. I want you to share your faith with that coworker or that stranger in the gym." There's been times where God has said, "Kate, I want you to go pray over that person because they are struggling. They need encouragement." There's been times where God has called me to go on a missions trip. And I remember not feeling qualified. I remember feeling fearful about going on that missions trip. I know that many of you maybe feel called to lead a Jesus club. And there's been times in my life when God called me to lead a Bible study or to lead a group or to lead a conversation. And the first thing that kept me from doing things boldly was always fear. I believe that fear is one of the greatest enemies of boldness. And oftentimes this is where we get stuck, RSQUAD. We think that once the fear disappears, then we can be bold. We think that once the obstacles are removed, then we can be bold. We think once it gets easy or feels easy, then we can be bold. We think that once I know more about the Bible, now I can be bold. But listen to this, RSQUAD, and you can write this down in your notes. Boldness isn't the absence of fear. It's being faithful despite it. And maybe today what keeps you from being a bold follower of Jesus is fear. Maybe it's the fear of people. Like, what are they going to think of me if I say this thing or do this thing for God? Maybe it's the fear of failure. And the reason that you haven't stepped out in boldness is because you're afraid that you're going to mess up. Maybe you fear change or new things. And God has called you to go somewhere new or try something new, but the idea of change scares you because you're comfortable and complacent right where you're at. Maybe your fear is in who God has created you to be. God has wired you exactly how he wanted you, and maybe you haven't fully trusted in how God made you. Maybe your fear is of the future. Maybe today you're stuck where you're at because you're scared about what's going to happen in 6 months. Or maybe you're scared about what's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years, and you're not taking bold steps of faith because you're stuck in fear of the future. And I believe that Moses felt a lot of these same things. Moses probably felt a lot of these same fears. And throughout his story, we see that he had every right to quit. Every excuse he could have made to say, yeah, no, God, I'm not doing this. Yeah, God, I'm out. I'm not going to be involved in this plan that you have because it's just too much. I'm too worried about what's going to happen next. I mean, we even see that Moses had no visible solution for how he was actually going to rescue thousands of people out of Egypt. I mean, God didn't say, all right, here's your 10-step plan on how we're going to do this. No, God said, hey, here's your next step. And you're going to be faithful even though you don't know what's next. We also see over and over and over again, Moses asked Pharaoh if Pharaoh would release the Israelites, and Pharaoh said no. And so we see that Moses experienced rejection over and over again. We also see that Moses' own people, the people on his team, turned on him. They eventually started mocking him and doubting him and his leadership. We see that Moses' people complained that they didn't have enough food or water. They were ungrateful. And so Moses experienced all these obstacles and trials all throughout trying to be faithful to the Lord. But despite everything seemingly going wrong, Moses stayed faithful to what God asked him to do. And eventually, after persevering through all the hardship, we see in Exodus 14, we see that God told Moses to raise his staff over the water. Now Moses has the Israelites, and they come to this sea, and God is like, Moses, I want you to raise your staff over this sea. Another thing that God asked, that Moses is probably like, God, why are you asking me to do this? But Moses is faithful. He raises his staff over the sea, and here's what Exodus 14, 21 through 23 says. Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all that night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground with walls of water on each side. Wow, that's crazy. The last part of this verse, it says, then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. The Lord had done a miracle, and Moses got to experience this as Moses and his people walked on dry ground through a sea. There's walls of water on each side, and these people, they get to the other side of the sea. And God asked Moses once again to raise the staff over the sea. Moses does it. The sea crashes down on the Israelites on the Egyptians, drowning the Egyptians, which means that the Israelites were free. Moses' faith was bold because despite his doubts, despite his fears, he continued to step out and do what God called him to do. He continued to be faithful even though he didn't know what was next. So the big question today is, how do we have a bold faith like Moses? So I want to encourage you with 3 things as we wrap up today. The first one is to ask. Ask. I want to encourage you to ask God for opportunities and to give you eyes to see. Because I believe if we want to have bold faith like Jesus, we have to begin to look around and ask God for opportunities to be bold and to step out in our faith. I believe that there's always a next step. There's always an opportunity for us to be bold in our faith, to share our faith, or to live out our faith. And maybe right now, as you ask God what that may be, He shows you that your next opportunity is to pray over that teammate at school. Or maybe it's to start applying for that missions trip or leading that Jesus Club. Or maybe you recently got saved several years ago and you've never been baptized. And maybe that is your next step to be bold. But I want to encourage you to ask God and let Him speak to you. The next one is to trust. This is a big one because when we are living boldly for Christ, the things that begin stirring in our mind are often fear and often doubts. But we can always remember that God is with us and that we can fully trust Him with our lives and with the plans that He has for us. And God shows us that He was with Moses all along the way. And if He is with Moses, we know that He is with us. And all throughout Scripture, He reminds us that He is with us and He never leaves us. Joshua 1:9, it says, "Have I not commanded you?" God says to be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And so as you're living boldly for Jesus, you can always trust and know that God is with you in every conversation and in everything that you do. And then the third one is to go. Ask, trust, and now it's time to go. It's time to step out. Because when you ask God for that opportunity, He will give you an opportunity to be bold. And so what does that mean? That means it's finally doing the thing that God has called you to do. Maybe it's something that you've been ignoring for a long time and you know that it's time. So I want to encourage you to take that step of faith, jump out, and let's be a church, let's be a ministry that lives a life of bold action. Because Christ followers live a life of action, not of complacency. And so RSQUAD, thanks for hanging out with us for our second week on our series, Bold. I hope this was an encouragement for you. And RSQUAD, I can't wait to hear about all the bold things that you get to do for Jesus this week. We'll see you next week.